So in this short video, we're going to be looking at Carrol 1979 to 1991 and how she really defines corporate social responsibility and the four different components she uses to explain CSR, which includes the economic side, the legal side, the ethical side, and the philanthropic side, and the different components. Before we can go on to look at another short video which covers the triple bottom line, and then the views of various authors in terms of their thinking and what they feel in terms of corporate social responsibility. So if we look at Carrol's four-part definition of corporate social responsibility, this has four different components, which includes the economic side, the legal, the ethical, and the discretionary, philanthropic. The expectations that society has of organizations at a given point in time. So when they looked at the study, found that experts were capable of distinguishing among the four different components. And further, the factor analysis conducted concluded that there were four empirically interrelated but conceptually independent components of corporate social responsibility, which are these four different components that we mentioned before. So the economic responsibility is the first condition. As a fundamental condition or requirement of existence, businesses have an economic responsibility to the society that actually permitted them to be created and sustained. At first glance, it may seem unusual to think about economic expectations as a social responsibility, but this is what it is, and because society expects, indeed requires businesses, organizations to be able to sustain themselves, and the only way or possible is to get them to do this is to be profitable and to be able to incentivize owners or shareholders to invest and have enough resources to continue in operation. And if we think about it and we try and relate this back to various businesses and we relate this back to the banking industry, if we look at the financial crash in 2008, we can see that banks had overextended themselves, overstretched themselves, invested into the subprime markets to try and make more profits. And it wasn't going too well because on households, consumers were now defaulting on households, and they had gone into the subprime markets, and so now they were on the verge of going into bankruptcy in the UK and had to be bailed out by the British government. So it then involved taxpayers' money having to be put into the banks to sustain them. So if you think about it, we don't want our banks going down. We want them to be profitable and we want them to be able to sustain themselves and to keep going. So we want to know that they are safe and secure because we put our money into these banks. So we can see one example here in terms of economic responsibilities. If you think about the legal responsibilities, well, society has not only sanctioned businesses as economic entities, but it has also established the minimum ground rules under which businesses are expected to operate and function. So we think about legal responsibilities, in terms of a legal entity, a limited liability company, the Companies Act 2006, that companies must, become a legal separate entity, and they must file their accounts, they must submit all their paperwork, and they must do it in an ethical a way, and also according to a legal framework in terms of accounting principles. So these ground rules include laws and regulations, and the effect reflect society's view of codified ethics in that they articulate fundamental notions of fair business practices as established by lawmakers at federal, state, and local levels. And even if we think about examples that we've seen in the past with Tesco's losing £200 million in their balance sheet. Well, how can this be? How can you mislay £200 million in your balance sheet, giving a false reading in terms of what your current and fixed assets are, when they were £200 million less than that? So again, we can see here the legal responsibilities in terms of accounting issues that companies, in terms of a separate legal entity, and the Companies Act, a limited liability company, public limited or private limited companies must adhere to. We expect these from companies. If we think about ethical responsibilities, the normative expectations of most societies hold that laws are essential but not sufficient. In addition to what is required by laws and regulations, society expects businesses to operate and conduct their affairs in an ethical fashion. Taking on ethical responsibilities implies that organizations will embrace those activities, norms, standards, and practices that, even though they are not codified in law, are expected nonetheless. Part of the ethical expectation is that businesses will be responsive to the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. And again, ethical responsibilities are very important to adhere to. And because if you don't, then there is no hiding in today's society with social media. You'll be found out. If you are, a retail business and you have suppliers in India, and those companies are, using children under the age of 12 to make your clothes because it's cheaper to get the clothes made from those manufacturers using children, or you know people working in those conditions which are unsafe, where the building might come down and kill people, which has happened in the past, then again, this is not ethical, even though it's not required in the English legal system in terms of the way they conduct themselves. From an ethical perspective, the end consumer is not going to be too happy if they find out that they are undertaking these type of practices in terms of their ethical responsibilities to society. So if we think about the philanthropic responsibilities, corporate philanthropy includes all forms of business giving. Corporate philanthropy embraces business voluntary or discretionary activities. Philanthropy or business giving may not be a responsibility in a literal sense, but it's normally expected by businesses total and is part of the everyday expectations of the public. Certainly, the quantity and nature of these activities are voluntary or discretionary. If I take the example of the Tesco's high street store in Streatham Vale that was built, well, the Tesco store, before it could be built, had agreed with the local community to actually build a swimming pool there. They had agreed to build an ice ring, which they did, and they also built on top of their store, affordable housing for the local community to be able to rent out those apartments at a very discounted rate. And Tesco's built, housing, a swimming pool, and an ice ring so that they can give back to the local community and show that what they were investing, because they were making profit by their new store in this area. So again, philanthropic, empathy and in terms of giving and their responsibilities, it's all part of this corporate social responsibility.